Hi and welcome to another episode of the Bonsai Stuff podcast. It's me, Scott Martin from Bonsai Matsu, as always, and thank you very much for tuning in. I appreciate it, as always. This should be an interesting podcast and a bit of a continuation from the previous podcast where a few areas are going to be expanded on. Going to continue with the fundamentals of design, pick another couple and discuss those, how they relate to, or as I see how they relate to bonsai. And just going to continue on with my Japan journey. Last time it was my build up to Japan, to going over there, how I got involved with bonsai and how I developed the passion and desire to sort of learn more. And this podcast is going to delve into my first trip over there, which was fantastic. And in the meantime, I've pulled out my my notebooks from my time over there when I sat down every day and night and wrote down everything that was told to me like an absolute sponge. And it's actually been really enjoyable going back through, reading it all again. And it's amazing how that trip back in 2012, how it had such a massive impression on me, and how I still to this day use things that were told to me and focus on things that I need to focus on from such a long time ago, and they're still relevant to this day. So that'd be interesting. Also, there's another, I mentioned last time about a bonsai convention in Perth. There's another one that I'm involved with too, called Bonsai Horizons. It's on the 18th, 19th of March up in Brisbane in Queensland, Australia, and I'm demonstrating and workshopping with another very talented Australian bonsai artist, Andrew Selman. And I'm really looking forward to it. That's going to be a great event. So if you are interested, it's Bonsai Society of Queensland, and the event's called Bonsai Horizons. So check it out. So without further ado, let's get into the podcast. So hello from sunny old Melbourne, Victoria, Australia. Well, it's not really that sunny at the moment. We've had heading last couple of days of our spring period, heading into the summer period, and it's been wet, it's been windy, it's been freezing. So the growing season should be extended by a little bit, I think, before the warmth of summer gets here, which is good for our bonsai. They'll get a bit more of a kick, a bit more of a feed, and a bit more growth on them. But it's definitely time for me to keep an eye on fungal issues with the trees after having been through such a wet, cool period. Anyway, so I want to start this podcast with a couple of things off topic a little bit. And one was, I was working the other day on a tree. It was a lot of work. A lot of work on a cedar that had to have needles plucked, it had to be thinned out, had to have shoots pruned, it had to be wired and styled, and it was a long job. And a couple of things came to mind that as I got further into the work, I found that, and I'm talking hours into the work, I found that my technique and my concentration started to lapse after about the 2-hour mark. And it started to become a bit of a blur, to be honest, after solid work on a tree with just, being 20, 30 centimetres away from foliage mass, just working it constantly over and over and over. And I said to myself, just go and take 5. Just go and have a walk around the garden, catch your breath, get away from it like you would in a normal workplace, get away from it and have a bit of a break. And I thought that's actually a really interesting point, that I've found that I have certain expectations of myself to perform at a certain level and do things of a certain quality. And when that starts to diminish or reduce, that's the point that I've got to stop, collect my thoughts, then get back on with it and make sure that I am at the level that I want to be. And I think it's important that you guys listening, guys and girls listening, that you sort of keep that in mind yourself. And whether it's after 10 minutes you have a break, or it's an hour, or it's 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever your endurance is to continue doing the intense work, I think you'll find that where you start, you might be a little bit rusty. Then you'll hit your sweet spot where everything goes perfectly well and looks great. And then you'll start to get towards the end of the tree, the last little bit, and it'll start to look a little bit scrappy. It's really, really common. And that's that's the part where I think you've got to take 5 before it gets to that point and you sort of undo all of your hard work. That's where you've got to stop. And maybe it's even leave it for tomorrow sort of job and come back to it rather than trying to plough through, get it done all in one hit. Maybe it's time to just sort of, catch yourself before you do some irreversible damage or, break something off or cut off something that you don't mean to. Then just remember that. Just take 5. Just draw breath. The other side of it was that as I was looking through a collection of trees that I was working on the other day, and there must have been, 12 or 15 trees lined up one after the other. And I had a very short period of time to get through those trees. And the other thing that came to mind was just head down, bum up, just get on with it. And when there's jobs that have to be done, I find that procrastination can be one of those things where you'll always find something else to do with your time rather than the stuff that you should be doing or that has to be done that's time sensitive. For instance, it's weeding your trees. That I'd consider that specifically to be time sensitive because the longer you leave it, the harder it's going to be and the more work that's going to be needed to be done. So that's one that's definitely got to be done promptly and accurately. And the other is something, whether it's defoliation or spring pruning before things get too long and thick or, decandling your black pines. It's, that's all time sensitive stuff that when it's go time, it's seriously go time. But I think you've got to combine the two where it's head down, bum up, but make sure that when you start, your work starts suffering and the quality of your work starts to deteriorate. That's when you've got to catch yourself before it goes too far and just draw breath. And that can be a 30-second breather or it can be a overnight rest. Whatever it is, depending on the time of the day and how you're feeling, I think it's really important that you don't, that you maintain the highest possible level of work and commitment that you can with your bonsai at whatever stage it is. And that doesn't mean it's the same for all of us. We're all at, everyone's at different levels, but what I'm saying is that you should be at the highest possible level you can be with your trees, and that gives them the best chance of taking that step forward that we talk about and progressing smoothly and evenly if you're doing things in a correct and punctual manner. Don't be slack with what you've got to do, but by all means, don't push yourself too hard.
Hopes one day that I would find a story to tell.
Righto, let's get into some more of this fundamentals of design series that started last episode of the podcast. So if you're jumping in now fresh, then might be worthwhile just connecting this podcast with the previous, just so it sort of makes sense. But one of the most important elements or design elements that I take into consideration when I'm working on any bonsai at any stage of its development is movement. And movement is one of those super important things that you can be shown movement and you can be explained to you and you can see it and go, oh yeah, I get what you're saying about the movement. And once your eyes are open to how to create movement with foliage mass or positioning of trunks or the apex of the tree or positioning inside the pot itself, it becomes probably one of the most, again, this is my opinion, my podcast, my opinion, becomes by far one of the most important elements when you're designing your bonsai. Well, for me, it definitely is. I see a lot of bonsai come through the workshop or get presented to me in one form or another via messaging or photos, and sort of like the general gist of it is there's something not right with this tree and I just don't know what it is. And almost invariably it's got to do with the movement of the tree. So let me just explain what movement is, and I'll explain what the common issue with it is that I see. So movement is where you're drawn as a viewer into a tree positioning itself left or right, basically, within a frame. So as you look at the nabari of the tree, so the base of the tree, as the viewer is drawn into that area of the first focal point, then the trunk movement heads up. Then the apex of the tree, it can be. I'm not talking about formal uprights here. So let's just talk about whether it's an informal upright. That's probably the easiest example to work with. So you follow the trunk up. There's a bit of movement left and right in the trunk or whatever it is. Then the apex sits a certain way, and then you look down the branching structure and you'll see, one side of the foliage will be longer than the other. So that's movement. So generally, as a general guide, or as a feeling to the movement, the longer branch, the first primary branch on the tree, generally indicates the movement or directional flow of the tree. Now, please, I'm just using very, very broad generalizations here. I know there's always parameters or design functions that will change this, but I'm just using this as a general guide for everybody, so I can paint a picture in your head while you're listening to the podcast. So the trunk goes up a certain way. The first branch comes out on a side of the tree, and then that's generally the longest side. Then you follow the trunk up to the apex of the tree, and the apex should be flowing in the same direction as that first indicator branch. All right, so I'll give you an example. Trunk of the tree, look at the nabari, the base of the tree moves towards the left. Like there's a bit of a strong movement to the left, and as you come up, it veers across to the right-hand side and tapers up towards the apex. Now, so the apex of the tree will then finish on the right-hand side of the base of the nabari. All right? That generally indicates that the movement of the tree is going to be to the right-hand side of the tree. That's because that's the way you're drawn. Goes to the left, comes back to the right, apex sits over the top of the right-hand side of the tree. So therefore, your first branch or your directional branch, or the branch that provides the movement to the tree, will be to the right-hand side of the design. So for me, the movement then on the left-hand side of the tree will be nice and compact to the tree and open and flowing towards the right-hand side. So if you look at the design of any of my trees and you see the movement going to the right-hand side, my left-hand side will be quite small, compact pads, and on the right-hand side, those pads will be a lot more open and possibly have some negative space in there. Another topic down the track, but there'll be some open area where there's nothing sort of drawing your viewing eye into that area, which dictates you to be drawn to that right-hand side of the tree. Now, as you get towards the top of the tree, obviously, things taper back in towards the apex, and the apex itself, if you consider it as there's always a peak, a top point to the apex, right? I'm not saying a triangle, but there's always a top point to the apex. Now, if the movement's to the right-hand side, then the highest point should be on the right-hand side of that apex as well. So if you imagine a triangle, if you let's just use a triangle. I know they're not all triangles, but let's just use a triangle. And you said the triangle was to be evenly sided, as much on the left as there was on the right. That would not indicate movement of the tree. Whereas if the left-hand side of the triangle was a bit more acute, a bit sharper in angle, and the right-hand side was flowing more and accentuating movement towards the right-hand side, then that would indicate the movement of the tree flows to the right-hand side. So you can use your design of the tree, your apex, your pads, your positioning of your pads to help with the movement and directional flow of the tree. Where it starts to go a bit pear-shaped, and where I feel that a common issue occurs is where something like the apex, you might have that movement of the trunk to the left, back to the right. You've got your first movement, your first directional branch on the right-hand side indicating movement to the right, but then you get towards the apex, and the apex may be positioned more towards the left-hand side of the tree and flowing more openly to the left-hand side and more acute on the right-hand side, which indicates movement to the left. So you've got a tree where the top is fighting itself to the left, but the bottom of the tree is fighting itself to the right. So it's out of whack. The directional, the movement or flow of the tree is counterintuitive to what you as a viewer are drawn towards, and that's really common. The other might be that one of the branches that's a little bit further down on the left-hand side of the tree is quite long. So you've got a directional branch and an apex sitting on the right-hand side of the tree, but you've got a branch that's sort of halfway up on the left-hand side that's quite long. So it's sort of, a lot of people try and design their bonsai to be balanced. So as you look at it from a distance, the left-hand side equals the foliage mass on the right-hand side of the tree. Where that lets the design down is it doesn't draw you to see the movement of the tree going a certain way. It just looks like it's a blob straight up, straight down. And cool, if that's what you want the tree to look like. But talking about the design elements that I consider important for designing bonsai, and this one being movement, I think it's really important that you get that kind of structuring where you are pushing one way or you're pushing the other. And it doesn't have to be to the right, it can be to the left or whatever it is. Or you might find that, you know, your lowest branch is a smaller tucked in branch, and then your directional branch, the movement branch, is up a little bit higher. It might be the second or third branch up the tree, and that's what brings you out. Like your design definitely can vary. It doesn't need to follow a standard set of guidelines, but the same principle for movement applies, where you are drawn a certain way and the rest of the tree needs to fall in line with that to sort of help the viewer come along and look at the tree and go, yeah, look at that, it all moves across nicely. And I can guarantee you that when you get it right and you put a tree on display at a show or in a public space or in your yard to people that aren't bonsai related, they'll be drawn more to those ones where there's that movement as opposed to that natural spread of foliage to try and even out the foliage mass on both sides of the tree. It makes a massive difference to the way that you'll be drawn in yourself, you know, to seeing it. And that's where the movement on a young piece of material, a really, really young piece, it's super important to me to make sure that I get exaggerated movement in that trunk on a very small whip that's, you know, only pencil thick, because as it ages, as it gets older, and as that bark starts to build and get thicker on the tree, you'll find that those exaggerated twists and turns on the tree suddenly start to blend together and become very, very mild. So if you take something which is very thin and you only put gentle movement into it, as it grows and as it develops, I'm talking, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the track, 100 years down the track, the movement that you put in it almost disappears and it becomes almost a very subtle, straight trunk. So if you want something with really strong movement in it and you want to take something young and really push it, then you've got to do it with intent from a very, very young age. And while we're talking about that too, one of the really common things that I see with a lot of young stock that's got movement in it, this includes nursery and personal stock, is that you start with good intention. You know, the first year you wire it, looks great, got really nice movement in it, backwards, forwards, left, right, whatever. Very interesting scale and proportion. Second year, possibly some movement in there. By the third year, things have got busy because your collection's grown, and it's really common that the third year of growth on a lot of young stock is very straight and boring. And I see it all the time where it's either, you know, you've got to cut off and remove that stock, and I'm talking, you know, when the tree's 5, 10 years old, you'll see a nice wiggle down the base and then a very straight section. It's like, well, you know, how do you put movement in something that's dead straight that's, you know, 5, 10 years old? The answer is very, very, with great difficulty. It's just never going to happen properly and not continue the same design as what the original movement was done when it was a young whip. So if you are someone that's listening and you are working with a lot of young stock, keep the movement going year on year on year. As you go out there and remove one lot of wire and you see a shoot that's taken off, put wire on that section as well and start pushing it up and moving it as well. And then, you know, once you work out the height that you want the tree to be, by all means, stop the movement then on the tree. But if you want it to be a tall tree, don't just do the first year or 2 years putting movement into the tree. It's super important to make sure that you continue on down that path. So that's movement. It's something that and flow of the tree. It's something that I'm I'm really, really passionate about. And if you've got a formal upright, you can still have movement put in by the size and positioning of your pads as you go up. It doesn't need to be constantly uniform up and down the tree. It might be, first branch comes out is, quite long. Second branch on the other opposite side might be quite small. Third branch on the original side might be medium. Then the fourth branch on the opposite side might be quite large. So, you can sort of have this staggered sizing of branches as you go up a formal upright tree to give you movement. And movement's really important with a formal upright because you are dead set intent on making that movement as vertical as you possibly can. You are putting everything you've got into making that tree straight. So the viewer gets the deliberate intent of your design to be perfectly straight. So movement does apply to all different styles. Windswept, not one of my favourite styles because it's so hard to get correct. But you look at a good windswept bonsai, and you are definitely drawn into the movement of that tree. That's what it's all about. It's the movement and flow of that tree that's the story that someone's trying to create by doing that to it and designing it that way. That's what they're trying to draw you in, is into deliberately seeing that movement of that tree across that way. So every time you work on your bonsai, I think that your movement should be the first thing you do before you start taking out your branch cutters or scissors, to look at it and say, what is the movement intent of this tree? Like, what's the, if I brought someone in to look at this tree, what would I want them to see? What would I want them to feel with this tree? And it starts with movement. All right. So the next design element that I want to talk about is balance. Now, you'd think that that's a weird one to go into straight after talking about movement, where I'm talking about exaggerating on one side of the tree and compacting in on the other. But I still think that balance is really, really important with the tree, because balance not comes from looking at it like a set of scales. Balance comes from me to looking at foliage mass on the trees. And I want to make sure that I've got a balanced outlook across the entire design. So the example I'll give is the apex of the tree. Vast majority of bonsai are strongest at the apex. I know all aren't, but vast majority are strongest at the apex. So when you sit back, like I'm talking, get 3, 4, 5 meters back from a bonsai, my intent with balance is for you to look at it, or the viewer to look at it, or me to look at it and say, that foliage looks really balanced. If I've done that, then tick the box. Great job. You've met the requirements of balance for your tree. If I look at it and think, geez, that apex is looking quite dense, whereas those lower branches look like they're about to die, then I haven't got the balance that I work with on that bonsai correct, and I need to do things to correct the balance. How you correct balance? You correct balance by always making sure that you prune the strong and you leave the weak to build their strength. Now, that's how we can do it. That's how we can make areas on a bonsai weaker, and we can encourage the tree to put resources in a certain area and make it stronger. Doesn't happen overnight. Doesn't possibly happen in one growing season. Possibly doesn't happen in 1 year. But once you get it right, then it becomes a lot easier to work on your bonsai. I was working on a corky bark Chinese elm day before yesterday, and it's a lovely tree, beautiful, but it had been pruned over and over and over to sort of form silhouette, which is great. Extensions come, they get cut back to second, third leaf for directional movement, no problems. But it had kept then getting cut back to form its shape, form its silhouette. And it wasn't hedge pruned, but the result was very, very similar in that the around the apex, around the strong area of the tree, you'd found this really thick, dense, coarse growth where clusters of this growth had come out. So rather than being thinned out every year, it had been grown, cut, and purely the thickening process on what was, 3, 4, 5 years ago, very fine, delicate growth had to be removed. So this is part of that 5-year cycle. It's been talked about in earlier podcasts where, you start at a certain point, a certain base, things grow year on year, and at about 5-year mark, you need to cut back and start thinning things out. My preference is to do that every single time I work on it. But with this tree that I was working on, this corky bark elm, it hadn't been done for a while, so it was my turn to get in there and start thinning this tree back to get back to some of that lighter, more tapered growth. So it was fine and delicate around the apex. And the thing that I was thinking about while I was working on it was I've got to balance the structure on this tree. So not only the strength of the tree, I've got to balance the structure. So as I look along a branch, I want it to start thicker and end thinner. And I don't care whether it's the lowest branch, it's the tallest branch on the tree. Everything's got to have taper for me, whether it's the trunk, whether it's, a branch that's only, a couple of centimetres long. I'm always looking, rather than having a branch that's 2 centimetres long that's the same thickness, if I cut that back to 1 centimetre and there's a little branch coming out there, then that new little branch is obviously going to be thinner. So therefore I'll force taper into that section of the tree. And I'm balancing the growth on the tree. So I want to make sure balance works from the point of view that I'm bringing strong areas down a peg and I'm working on weak areas and bringing them up to a certain level where I know that they're going to get stronger. But I'm also working on the structure of the tree itself to make sure that I'm balancing it. So when I sit back and look at a silhouette, a winter silhouette of a tree, I'm not looking at thick, coarse areas in strong areas. I'm looking at nice, dainty, delicate foliage and delicate branch structure across that entire section of the tree. So I've got to balance that out considerably. The other thing I have to work with balancing, and it sounds stupid, right? But one of the most important things for me to do is to balance the root structure of the tree. So I want all areas of that root ball to be equally strong, to have equal strength. And that for me comes with making sure that when I position a tree in a pot, that I don't push it too far to one side. If I position and I offset my tree in a pot to try and exaggerate the movement of the tree. So if it's going, we'll use the same example, the tree's moving to the right-hand side of the tree, you can often position it to the left-hand side of the tree from the front viewing angle, and that sort of exaggerates that right-hand movement of the tree. But by doing that, by positioning the tree onto the left-hand side of the pot, the roots on the left-hand side of that tree don't get fair game when it comes to growing. They sort of hit the brick wall of the edge of the pot, start to wrap around and start running out of space as they head back towards the right-hand side of the tree. So it's really important that, sure, I've got to take movement into consideration, but it's really important for me to make sure that I consider balancing the root growth on that tree. And it'll mean moving it a little bit towards more the center of the pot. And you can get movement by positioning your tree, a couple of percent off center, as opposed to smashing it to one side of the pot too. The pot's, a foot wide. Rather than going smack in the center, just shimmy, an inch or so to the left side of the pot if it's moving towards the right hand side, and that gives you enough of an idea that you've deliberately positioned that off center to push the viewer a certain way with the movement of the tree. So balance comes in so many different forms, and balance gets taken into account when you fertilize the tree too. I use the tea bag method. So when I'm positioning those fertilizer bags to ensure that I get that balanced root growth as well, I'm positioning those tea bags at even spots around the pot. I'm not always putting it in exactly the same space, because I know that the roots of the tree are going to be drawn towards that fertilizer bag. So I try and make sure that I'm balancing out the root growth consistently along the pot. So what seems like a really simple concept of balance, like a set of scales, it's a set of scales, but it's got to do with strength of the tree. Am I balancing the strength of the tree? the foliage balance, am I going to have it where, I don't consider balance to be left and right side are evenly balanced unless it's a formal upright design. But the foliage that's within each of the pads definitely has got to be, it doesn't matter if it's a small compacted pad or it's a large directional pad that's flowing to one way. I make sure that the foliage mass that I've got in all of those pads ultimately is balanced and it's delicate and it's fine. It's not thick, it's not coarse. I'm not jamming in foliage just for the sake of making a pad. I'm making sure that everything's getting sunlight, everything's balanced to get airflow and circulation in there. Everything has those inner buds popping like crazy. So when I do get to these thick, coarse areas that I need to reduce the 5-year cycle, I've got plenty of options. I'm not stuck there going, well, that's it. I've now got to cut off the entire branch because I haven't balanced the foliage over all these years. So balance is definitely one of the super important ones when it comes to the design of your bonsai.
Hopes one day that I would find a story to tell. How every regret so soulless empty life.
So my first trip to Japan to study bonsai was in 2012, and day one arriving was 27th of January. So just after Australia Day, landed in Japan. So I'll go back a little bit. So this is part two of my bonsai journey, and in particular, this section is on that first trip to Japan. And how it all came about was bonsai artist who's brilliant is Peter T. If you haven't checked him out, you should. He was doing a blog at the time, and then put together, which I was a great fan of, and really enjoyed his teachings and the way he does things, and it seemed to sort of click with his learning style. And I was at that point in my life was yearning for some consistency and someone to sort of learn from. So Peter put out on his blog that he was organising at the nursery he was studying at or doing his apprenticeship at Aichien in Nagoya in Japan, that they were offering short-term apprenticeships. So those people that couldn't commit full-time to doing an apprenticeship, you could go and get the see and feel of what an apprentice lives like. And it was made pretty clear that you would live and work just like an apprentice over there, and that was exactly what I wanted, And I was very fortunate at that time that I was running my own business and married with 3 beautiful daughters. So I was very fortunate at that time to be able to get the time off to head over there to do it. And I think I was about the second person to get over there and do it. And I was super excited. So I was so fresh to go into Japan that I didn't realise that most of the travel internally in Japan is done on the Shinkansen and on the bullet trains. So when I arrived there, flew into Tokyo from Australia and jumped on board a local flight to go down to Nagoya and board the plane. I was the only person on the plane. There was not one other person. Which I went, okay, look, I won't be doing that again. There's obviously no need to. It's too expensive and it's too time consuming, and just there's far better ways to get around, which you learn through experience. But one thing I did get on my way down to Nagoya in this plane was one of the most spectacular clear views of Mount Fuji, which I still remember to this day. And I took some amazing photos out the window, and it really, really put my trip on a great high. I've been quite nervous heading over there, thinking, what are they going to expect from me, and what am I going to get out of this experience? And there's so much more to it than just my time. It was my wife and my kids that I'd sort of left behind too. And it was it was just one of those points where I looked out the window, saw Mount Fuji, and I thought, no, it's going to be okay. And just commit, really commit everything you've got to this experience, and be a sponge. This is not about fighting the tide. This is not about the what ifs and I do it like this. It's more like, okay, teach me. I want to learn as much as I possibly can. And then once I get to a certain level, I can then interpret what I've learned and apply it to the best of my ability to my own personal circumstances. So yeah, I did. Got over there and was graciously met at the airport by Mr. Tanaka, who is the chief at ICN, and again, about the same age as me, and one of the nicest blokes you'll ever meet. And in my lead up to heading to Japan too, you sort of get this statement of fact that it was, you've got to be able to deal with a certain number of things. Smoking's a big thing in Japan. There's hierarchy rules. There's the way things are done in Japan, and we don't want people coming over here fighting the way of life, saying, "Well, where I come from, this is what we do." So you sort of have to sign off on that and be aware that there are going to be cultural differences, which is the one thing that I was really looking forward to. I really, really wanted to immerse myself in that culture, and I find that I like a lot of people, I suppose. You don't travel around the world to take with you your own baggage. You travel around the world to have your eyes broaden and then your mind broaden to different things. So that was me going in Japan. Was I really wanted to be super respectful and super courteous and be as polite as I possibly could, and via that get as much information as I possibly could in a really enjoyable manner, rather than you hear some of these horror stories about these nurseries in Japan. I can honest to God, hand on heart, say that I've not been subject to anything that's been horrible whatsoever. Yeah, sure, the learning techniques are different, but my personal experience is it was some of the best things I've ever done in my life, to be honest. Absolute, hands down, some of the best. So got picked up at the airport by Mr. Tanaka, and Peter T was there also, and I got to meet Juan. Juan Andreas was also doing the short-term apprenticeship at that time, and he and I bunked up together in one of the rooms inside the house, inside the nursery in Nagoya, Aichi-en, and it was amazing. It was something. Living and sleeping on a tatami mat in the peak of winter over there and coming from summer, the heart of summer in Australia, to where I was wearing board shorts and surfing every day, to getting to Japan where it was snowing and it was freezing was a massive shock, massive change to the climate. But again, you don't go there without expectation on these sort of things. So that was how the day started, and I remember that being super nervous when I was picked up by these guys and heading to Aichi-en and just driving on the freeways and seeing different things and different cars and the city and just everything being completely blown away. First time in Nagoya at that time, and I was just like, wow, this is amazing, truly amazing. And I was quite tired because it was a decent flight from Melbourne to get over there. And when we arrived, drive straight into the nursery, they basically said, "Look, come out here, suitcase in hand. Let's show you the workshop. That's the first thing you're going to see when you walk in the nursery." And I walked past some of the most amazing trees. I remember my jaw just dragging on the floor, thinking, "Oh my God, look at this! How fortunate am I? I'm going to get up close and personal with these trees." And get to work on some stuff here as well, and get to physically touch some of these magnificent species. So I walk straight in, get into the workshop. Everyone sort of sits down, and bang, it started straight away. So it's like might get changed, and they're like, no, let's go, let's get into it. Let's introduce you. Let's see, So I got to meet some other people that were doing apprenticeships there and working there at the time, and then got shown that this was my work area, this is my workbench, this is my seat, this is where you'll keep your tools, and this is where the trees will start to flow from. So that was it. I was in the nursery for a couple of minutes, and bang, it was straight into the learning and into the experience, which I remember at the time being just exhausted. International travel takes its toll on me at the best of times, but having all that that emotional build up at the same time was quite draining. And to finally get there was like, really, I could really just go and put my feet up now and have a kip for a couple of hours, and then I'd come back fresh and have a shower and be ready to go. But no, it was straight into it. So first tree was a little Japanese black pine, and I was given the job of the task of cleaning it and working on it and thinning out branches, doing the winter work on a black pine. And it was beautiful. It was one of the most amazing showing that I'd seen up till that point. It was a thick little trunk, and it was like back in Australia, back where I've come from. I've never seen a tree like this. It was amazing. It was the very first tree that I was given to work on. It's like, wow, this is just such a privilege. So you get out the tool roll, everyone has a sort of look, make sure you've got your own stuff that you need to do, which was all made very clear to me before going there, which was great. So I had everything that I needed, and into it I got. I started cleaning, plucking needles, was shown how to do certain work on the tree, and then it was up to me as like a tester almost, I suppose, to see what stage I was at and where, not from a negative point of view, but really what I needed to be shown and where improvements could be made. Well, that's how I felt anyway, and I thought it was a great start. Being given the respect that, hey, here's quite a nice tree. It might have been nothing to people in Japan or other parts of the world, but to me at that point in my life, having really not had access to fantastic trees, to finally get something like that, it was like, wow, this is fair dinkum unreal. Like bonsai life just doesn't get much better than this. So it was. I started cleaning, and I'm looking at my notes now as I'm reading, because it's, like I said, I documented everything. I got to clean it out by needle plucking and pruning, and I was taught that, you're going back to two buds at any one location maximum. Sometimes it's got to be less than that, and you're looking to shorten the branches all the time, make it more compact, rather than focusing how can I wire and compact this thing. The first thing was, okay, prune it as you see it should be shaped, and then we'll start the wiring process. So that's sort of where it got to for the first day in the workshop. I was still in my travel clothes. I still had my suitcase beside me. I had my tools out, and I'd sap on my fingers straight away from minute one walking into that workshop. So then we would go. I took my suitcase into the room, got shown, this is where everything is. That's cool. I was like, yeah, I'd really, really love to have a bit of a rest. This is like, well, dinner's ready. You've got to come eat. And that was the great part about that initial experience. It was because we were living in the family house, dinner time was family dinner time. So everybody got together, the kids, three beautiful sons, Mr. Tharker's wife. We'd all get together and we'd have dinner together. And it was so good for me to, going back, wanting to be immersed in the culture and soak everything up like a sponge. Got that with the food as well. Like, there was no restaurant quality food. The food was restaurant quality and above, but there was no going to a restaurant, ordering your meal and sitting down, then coming home and going to bed like you would in a hotel. It was family cooked meals. And the first night was this traditional chicken curry and rice for dinner. And my notes were, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, a traditional Japanese curry that had been cooked for me. It was like, oh, that's just amazing. And so anyway, then dinner finished and I went to the room and I went, that's it. I can't stay any longer. I've got to go and have a shower. And it was, without anything being said to me, I said, look, I'm getting my stuff. I'm going for a shower. So I grabbed my gear, jumped in the shower, whatever, got out of the shower and went, yep, felt great, went to bed. No worries. Wrote the notes, wrote down some more stuff, which I'll go through at another time, some specific learnings, from talking with Peter and Juan and me, we'd go back to the workshop after I had my shower, which was quite early this first night, and I'd ask questions and we'd talk and we'd work more on trees, and it would get very late in the night and you'd head off to bed. So So then that was the first day, and what I learned from that first day was when I came to the second day, which I'll go through at another point. Some other things that I'd learnt was that, had dinner again, finished, said, that's it, I'm going to have my shower. I was gently grabbed by Peter, who had a separate room from Juan and myself in the house, just down the hallway a little bit. And he said to me, look, I know you want to shower, but you can't yet. And it's like, oh, okay. Was I too long yesterday? Did I run the water out? What was the deal? And he said, no. There's a system for it. And I said, okay. What's the system? How does it work? And he said, okay, so first person to have a shower is Grandma. It's like, okay, because Grandma was in the house as well, living there. It's like, cool, no worries. And he said, okay, so then it's the 3 kids. It's like, okay, yep, no problems, I can do that. And he said, then it's Mrs. Tanaka, Mr. Tanaka, me being the senior apprentice, Juan, because he was here the day before you, then you. He said, because you're the last one here. I went, right. So every day I've got to wait for everyone else to have a shower before I get in. He goes, that's the apprentice way. That's how it works, The last person in is the last person to get anything. That's the way that the system worked there. And it's like, cool, no problems. If that's the way it is, you tell me. I'm not looking to buck the system. I want to embrace the system. So from then on, my showers were at about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night every night. And by that stage, I was exhausted. I could barely keep my eyes open from working and learning and working on trees in the workshop. You get up very early, and a typical day would be start around 6:30, work through lunch, chores, running around, visiting people, never sitting still in the workshop for a whole day. I don't think that happened to me once. Dinner, back to the workshop to do more educational stuff, more alone time with the apprentices. So I'd get to ask them a lot of questions. Just ask them. We'd talk and we'd learn, and I'd sponge stuff as much as I could. Then it'd be like, righto, I'm having a shower. He'd come out. I'm having a shower. He'd come out. Righto, mate, it's your turn to go and have a shower. And it's like by that stage, I'd get in bed and I'd sit down and I'd write my notes out, make sure I didn't lose 1 ounce of information from the whole day. So it'd always be at least sort of half an hour of scribbling notes down every day. And then seriously, it'd feel like I'd close my eyes. Then it'd be right, let's go, get up. And you're back into it for the next day. So it was an awesome experience. It was exhausting, and it was just one of those events that I don't think you can talking about it doesn't really give you enough of an insight to what it was. But it was, it's amazing. Like, flicking through this book, I got to go to Cockapoo 10 and do setup of the trees, which there can't be many people who got to do that. And I got to do that on about I think it was the 9th day that I was over in Japan for my very first trip. I'm helping push trees into one of the best bonsai exhibitions in the world, and seeing these, I call them rock stars of my bonsai world, where you get to be up close and personal with people that you've only ever seen in magazines, and it was just like, this is incredible. And then as the trees come in and you get given some free time when everything's sort of done, you get people take off, the professionals go off and talk to each other and do what they're going to do, and you get to walk around, and I got to take photos. Back then you couldn't take photos, but I was allowed to take photos because it was behind the scenes. And you get to look at the structure on these trees, and rather than, I don't know, anyone that's been to these big bonsai exhibits, and they're all similar, where it's like you're on a conveyor belt. You get in there and you look at a tree, and you sort of got this pressure from behind of all these extra people behind you that have come in that want to see that tree, and the next and the next. So when you're looking at trees or the bonsai, you get a few minutes, maximum few minutes. But with this setup that I got to do, you'd get to see there and look at the structure and study the structure and look at how things connected and how it was built and the effort and the hard work that had gone into those bonsai to get to that point. It's like, God, it's no wonder this is the best bonsai exhibit in the world, because so much work has gone into it. It's not a month of planning. It's not 6 months of planning. It's not 6 years of planning. It's like 60 years of planning to get these trees to a certain point where the pinnacle of their being is right then and right there. And it's amazing. The quality of the stands, the quality of the pot. It's honestly, you just can't, words can't put into it what I got out of doing that time in Japan. And, I'm looking at a list. On the I'd been asked by one of the local bonsai clubs before I went that when I came back, would I come and do a presentation on my time in Japan? And I went, yep, definitely. And so I was thinking on the plane on the way home from Japan, what's the musts? If someone else said to me, I want to go and study in Japan, or I want to go and do this trip that you've done, what are the musts? And I thought I'd make a list, like a cheat sheet of what I'd learnt over that period of time being in Japan. And it's none of it's negative. I don't see any of this as absolutely negative. It's just, it's cultural, and it's stuff that you just have to deal with. So in Australia, generally, people don't take their shoes off when they come in your house. You don't take your shoes off to walk around the house. Well, I never have. And, some people, maybe when your floor's polished for a little while to avoid scuffing, yeah, sure, you'll take your shoes off. If your boots are muddy, yeah, you'll take them off. But it's not, for me, it was never something that had to be done automatically. So that was the first thing I wrote. You must enjoy having no shoes. And being in the heart of winter and having no shoes on, your toes froze. I found like I was frozen to the core consistently through my feet. And another thing is, in Australia at the time, smoking had been made illegal in restaurants and public spaces and that sort of thing. But you got to Japan and smoking was massive back then in 2012. And I remember we'd get in the car and we drove in the middle of the night to Kokofu, and it was freezing outside. The snow was coming down, and people are in the car and smoking. And if you couldn't handle smoke in an enclosed environment, then it's not for you, and especially when you're eating. People don't smoke when you're eating at a restaurant. Well, they didn't. I think that things have changed now, but back then it was, the people beside you would finish eating, and the first thing to do would be light up a cigarette. So you're just starting to eat your meal, and people were smoking within a metre of your table. And I found that very confrontational, because it's something that, being a non-smoker, a non-smoking family, that to have that experience and have that happen so regularly, that it was sort of like, wow, this is so different. The other was, you must enjoy bowing. It was a sign of respect and courtesy and greeting and all that sort of stuff. And when I first went there, Australia, never bowed, never do. But over there it was expected. So it was constantly something that you'd have to do, and you have to be ready for it. You must enjoy. This is the one I love, because I look back on this with a smile on my face. You must enjoy having no set plans. And from that I meant that every day something new happened. It was incredible. It was an amazing experience where, it would be, okay, what's on for tomorrow? Okay, so tomorrow we're going to start the day by working in the workshop. Work on that tree. We'll try and get that done. And when that's done, we'll do some learnings, and then we'll go on to the next tree. Cool, no worries. Next day, go out there, gets 8, 9 o'clock. Mr. Tanaka's sitting there in the corner smoking a cigarette, and he'd go, let's go. And it would be, cool, where are we going? Just get in the car. So everyone would down tools immediately. We'd all jump in the minivan, and we'd be off. And it'd be an adventure. And it would be, heading to a customer's house to work on trees. It would be going to buy a mini chainsaw because some work needed to be done on a piece of timber that was being made into a pot for a tree, customer's tree that was coming in later that week. It would be so many different things that you would not know what was happening from day to day. You'd visit some obscure little nurseries tucked away somewhere because Mr. Tanaka wanted to purchase a piece of material. It would be visiting another professional. it was incredible. Like the having no set plans would be, I remember talking with my wife, and she'd say, "What are you doing today?" I'd walk around the nursery every day, first thing, talking to her, 7 o'clock in the morning. I had a great night last night, did this, did that. After I spoke to you today, it's snowing over here. Look at this, the water's frozen, and this is my tree I'm working on today. I'm going to get that finished and whatever. Then that night I'd FaceTime with her, and she'd go, "How'd you go with the tree?" And I go, "I didn't touch it. Did not put one piece of wire on that thing because we did this, and this." And it was like the most amazing experience. I got to work on this tree at a customer's house. I got to do this, I got to do that. And it was just incredibly flexible, and you just had to roll with the punches. So if you went there thinking you would follow a program or follow a set menu, there's no hope. And the next one was, you must enjoy seeing and doing things that most people will never experience. The experiences that I got on my trips to Japan were hands down just so unique and so, so off the beaten track, and so much not part of a set agenda going on a Japan tour that you just, it's really hard to get the experience into paper because it was so different that, it's just amazing. And then the next one, I'll finish with this next one. There's about 100 of these things, but the next one was, you must enjoy eating anything. And that was, when I travel, I have this thing that whatever is put on my plate, I will eat. Doesn't matter what my preference is at home. Doesn't matter what I think is not pleasant to eat. When I travel, it's like, yep, if it's there, I'm going to eat it. And things like, we're talking about going to a ryokan in Japan and eating chicken esophagus. It was, it wasn't the most enjoyable meal, but certainly I got a lot out of it because I got to experience what it would be like to eat those foods. And I think that's part of the experience with traveling, is you come back with such a broad understanding of things that you don't come home. You should never come home the same from traveling, and especially on something like this life-changing trip that I'd wanted. So, I'll go over more of what I ate over the podcast, but yeah, Japan was that first trip to me was truly incredible. So I learned a lot that first couple of days working on that pine. I'd learned realistically what I didn't know, and how much I had to learn. I wired the tree, I shaped it, I made it look nice, and I didn't make it a good bonsai, I made it look nice, and that was my very first mistake that I made over there, was things shouldn't be made look nice, things should be made into a good bonsai. And the good bonsai doesn't need to be today, it doesn't need to be tomorrow, it doesn't need to be in 5 or 10 years' time, but it needs to be set on a path that makes it a good bonsai. And that is probably the most important lesson that I learnt for all of my travel. Good structure is good bonsai. And also that hand in hand with that goes very good technique and application of good technique. One of the most important or critical techniques that you've got to get right is wiring. If you can't get wiring right at a high level, then you'll find that you'll always struggle from there on out. And it makes such a massive difference to get the wiring right. And that was one thing that I'd learnt, that I needed to be reset with my wiring, that it wasn't as good as what I'd thought in my head, or wasn't up to a standard that I deemed as acceptable anymore going on. And that was just the first day. That was what I learnt in the first day of arriving in Japan. So lots more to come on my bonsai learnings through the podcast. So let's see what happens next time. Well, I hope you enjoyed those little snippets into my bonsai development, and maybe paints a bit of a picture for how I see the bonsai world, and how I sort of profess to teach and educate and the path that I follow for my bonsai, because it was, as I said, going to Japan was and cementing things into my thick little brain was really super important to me. And it's not from mimicking, but it's just the exposure I think that I know that I got to really good people, to really good bonsai, and to really good techniques, and maybe seeing for the very first time behind the bonsai curtain at a high level that I hadn't experienced before. And things are definitely changing around the world. There's people that have learned, not only, I'm not saying Japan's the mecca and the only place where you can learn really good bonsai, but to me that's where it was at. And that was at the time, this course that was operated and run from IGN was really the only window that I had, the only opportunity that I had to get that information and get that insight. There was nowhere in Europe that was offering it. There was, definitely nowhere in Australia that was offering anything near that level. I find it's simple. Even to this day, I find that there's a lot of places that'll offer introduction courses where you make a bonsai quickly and then you bugger off and you're left to your own devices. But there's not a lot that offer you some kind of a path or progression or an insight into really, really high-end bonsai technique and application. And that was where I've dedicated myself with Bonsai Matsu to making sure that I'm not a bonsai nursery. I don't profess that I want to sell juniper whips by the millions per year. That's not where I get my bang for my buck. But I promised myself that I will always offer as much information as I can at a high level, and hence this podcast, which you guys listen to. It's YouTube, it's Instagram, it's everything. It's inspire, inform, involve. That's the three key things that I've built myself on. Not just my bonsai business with Bonsai Matsu, where I try and inspire. I definitely inform as much as I possibly can through any of the mediums, and I involve. It's not just a one-way street. It's not just a directional flow from me to you, saying, "Here, look how good I am." It's hey, if you want to improve and you want to get your level to a certain level and I can help with that, then 100% I'm there. I'll put my back into it and I'll make sure that I can do everything I possibly can to get you to that point. So that's you're sort of starting to see the piece of the jigsaw come together for Bonsai Matsu and for me as to where I see the world. But anyway, that's the end of the podcast. Thank you very much for tuning in and sticking around and subscribing and giving me all the positive feedback that I get after these podcasts. It's really lovely. If you do want to get in touch, as always, just a reminder, through the socials. That's often the best way to get hold of me. And I will keep the content coming. I have more plans for everything: Instagram, YouTube, podcast. You'll be sick of me if you're not sick of me already. But yeah, thank you for sticking around. Don't forget about Bonsai Horizons in March in Brisbane next year. Guaranteed to be a great show, and it will have some interesting stock. And like I said, Andrew Selman's up there, and he's a great bonsai professional as well. So you'll get to see some pretty cool things done, I think. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. Until next time, as always, happy bonsai.